VTOL VR is a right gem. It's got the military sim vibes of DCS, but someone's thrown on a layer of Top Gun swagger. The action in this game is more explosive than a pub row on a Friday night. Proper lively it is. And if you've never fancied yourself a pilot before, no need to panic, because VTOL VR is easy as pie to pick up and play. And hold on to your knickers if you're a DCS old timer thinking this is just plain dishwater that lacks depth, because VTOL VR will leave you pleasantly surprised. Even in 2024, it's still strutting around like the dog swinging cherries, making it one of the finest VR games money can buy. So put the kettle on and grab a cuppa, and let's explain all in today's review. You know, watching VR games on a 2D screen is like watching my old man trying to order a pint in a Spanish bar. Things get lost in translation. They end up looking as choppy as a butcher's block, jaggy as a cat on tiles, and let's be honest, VR games, they look, well, basic at best. So I don't usually do VR reviews on the channel, because for you viewers, I'm not sure how well it translates over, because the reality is you need to experience it firsthand to appreciate the beauty of it. But VTOL VR deserves an exception. In VTOL VR, you get to create your own maverick pilot, which in essence is your career. Here they throw a few planes your way to get you started, including this belter. There's a spitting image of the old RAF Tornadoes. It does the whole shebang, vertical landings, horizontal ones, the lot. Then comes the tutorials, where all those blinking buttons really do something versus just being a placeholder. You've got to fire up the APU, crank up the main battery, kick those engines into gear, close the canopy, release the brakes, and taxi to the runway. And if you're a seasoned flight simmer, you might think, well, what's the fuss, Reggie? I've seen it all before. But for the newbies, this is the gateway drug to the big boy league. Sure, it's not as fiddly as some of those other mammoth flight sims, none of that waiting for engines to hit a certain PSI nonsense. But that's alright, because VTOL VR packs in just enough realism to make it a proper laugh for the rookies. One of my biggest worries diving into VTOL VR was that it's a full-on dance with the VR controllers. No HOTAS or gamepad support here. So your right controller is your flight stick and your left one's on the throttle. You can tweak it a bit to fit your imaginary cockpit, but I will say there were moments when I couldn't quite reach certain switches comfortably. Blame it on my fat ass touching the armrest, but it was a bit of a struggle at times. But after a bit of tinkering and shedding a few pounds, I'd be in cloud 9, I reckon. So at first the controls had me wobbling like I've knocked back a few too many pints of whiskey. Absolute chaos up in the skies it was, as I violently turned full circle before plummeting into the ground. But as my wife has never told me, less is more, and after a bit of trial and error, I've got the controls under wraps. So for all you newbies out there, stick with it, because it's like learning to ride a bike. A bit wonky at first, but once you get the hang of it, you'll be soaring like an eagle. But I'll spill the beans straight. The tutorial in VTOL VR are as basic as they come. Almost too basic if you ask me. Sure, they'll teach you how to get off the ground, but when it comes to understanding radar systems or which weapons to fire at what target types, it's a bit like trying to decipher Cockney rhyming slang for the first time. Veterans might breeze through it, but for you newbies, it's a proper learning curve where your best bet is to grab a cuppa and hit up a few YouTube videos to make sense of it all. And brace yourself for the loadout dilemma before each mission. It's all a bit overwhelming, and the game leaves you to figure it out on your own. Then come the missions, and well, they can feel a bit like a warm pint at times, a tad underwhelming. After each one, you're left thinking, is that it? Especially when you realise there's a limited lineup of planes to pick from. But hold tight, my Padawans, because here's where VTOL VR transforms from a Cessna into a 747, and that is the Steam Workshop. The wonderful VTOL community's gone all out, creating fully fledged voice-acted campaigns. Enemies pop up where they should, missions roll into each other with a story, and of course it's all free. Suddenly, that game you thought was a bit thin on the ground becomes an absolute beast with more missions than you can shake a stick at. Now, explaining why VTOL VR is such an incredible experience actually has a strong correlation to its graphical prowess. Now, you might have clocked the graphics first thing in this video, and yes, they are on the basic side. It ain't no eye candy, and that might put off some of you who haven't taken the plunge yet. But hold the press, because those basic graphics are what make this VR joyride smoother than a pint of Guinness this on St Paddy's Day. See, even on a modest risk, you're pulling off 120 frames per second without breaking a sweat. I'm using a Quest 3 over wireless and it's as smooth as butter. In a dogfight, when you're pulling off head turns and experiencing G-forces, those frames stay as steady as a rock. And that's the magic trick. VTOL VR sucks you into its world, Kim Kardashian style, and you are fully immersed throughout. Your focus is on the radar, on the bogey ahead, on picking the right weapons, all whilst keeping the flight steady. Forget that you're in VR? Absolutely you will. You're too busy feeling like a proper Top Gun hotshot. Now compare that to other flight sim games like Microsoft Flight Simulator or indeed DCS in VR. Sure, they are an absolute spectacle, but you need a rig that could launch a satellite to make it work smoothly, and even then you're battling stutters and lag here and there just to remind you of where you are. In VTOL VR, the wow moments aren't necessarily in the visuals, but rather the gameplay. You finish a mission about to land back at base and suddenly it hits you. You're still wearing a bloody headset, and any VR game that makes you forget about the plastic lump stuck to your face deserves the highest of accolades. As for those basic graphics, well, they're like a blast from the past, reminiscent of flight sims from the 90s, but with a bit more flair in the shapes and polygons department. The particle effects, however, add a lot, especially when missiles launch and leave a smoky trail before blowing up some poor sod to kingdom come. Likewise, the sun cresting over the horizon has a glorious glow to it and proves how art style will always trump graphical fidelity. But there are things that could spice up the party, like some dynamic weather or clouds to make life trickier, and maybe a bit of turbulence or wind shear during landings, once you've got the basics down, of course. I get it, they wanted to keep it simple and welcoming, but after you've mastered the basics, a bit more of a flying challenge wouldn't go amiss. Now let's discuss the auditory feast in VTOL VR, and for the most part, it's executed perfectly well. Every switch and button gives you that satisfying click, the engines rev up accordingly until they hit full power, and other aircraft on the runway sound as they should when they take off into the horizon. Pull that canopy over your noggin and suddenly the outside noise gets muted, just like you would expect it to. Missiles whizzing off and distant explosions. That deep bass bomb hits just right. Everything's working its magic here, and the musical score in the menus is top notch and the cherry on the cake. But here's where the jukebox might skip a beat. The voice acting. Now don't get me wrong, it's a small team tackling a mammoth project, so I suspect the voices weren't recorded on the fanciest gear. I'd personally love to see them redo the mission voices and tutorials from the ground up and get some proper actors behind the mic to really turn this into something magical. It's the only part of the soundscape that makes my pint feel a bit flat. VTOL VR then is soaring high and proud as one of the best VR experiences you can lay your mitts on. You might be sitting there staring at this in 2D thinking it looks a bit plain and basic, but that overwhelming positive rating on Steam ain't just for show. This game grabs you by the scruff of the neck and refuses to let go, leaving you craving more the moment you put it down. The longevity is there thanks to the incredible community backing it up. Even if you're not pulling off expert level stunts in the cockpit, you'll find yourself tossing money at the DLC like it's confetti. And why is that? Well, because you want to see this game grow and flourish. It's a rare game that has me so fired up that I'm actually willing to splash the cash on DLC aircraft that I've barely touched, just so I can support the developers. VTOL VR does that to you. It makes you care, it leaves you hungry for more, and above all else, it makes you feel alive as you blast an enemy SAM site from a distance. But is this the best VR experience of all time? Well, not quite, but more on that in a future video. Until next time, my lovelies, Reggie out.